preservation of and increased access to the 92nd Street Y Humanities Audio Archives is generously funded by the National Endowment for the Humanities.
Good evening. The 92nd Street Y takes great pleasure in welcoming you here this evening. Immediately after the lecture, there will be a question period, and there will be ushers in the aisles with microphones for that purpose. And now it's with great pleasure and as a great honor that I present Isaac Bashevis Singer.
Ladies and gentlemen, this lecture I call The Kabbalah and Modern Men. What can modern men learn from the Kabbalah? My definition of a modern man is one who does not believe in any authority, who does not rely on old texts, but is looking for the truth in a scientific manner. When he comes to the higher questions, such a man is naturally skeptical. I would therefore call my lecture, What Can a Skeptic Learn from the Kabbalah? Has it any value for him today, or is it only a part of the history of human faith and superstition? I consider myself a skeptic as far as dogma and revelation are concerned, and I will therefore try to convey to you my own feelings about the Kabbalah. Even if my skepticism is a little different from that of others, I still believe that there are many among you who think and feel as I do. I have had, as you perhaps know, a deeply religious education. To my father and grandfather, every word of the Bible, the Talmud, and the commentaries was God's word. But very early I began to see that many things that are ascribed to God are man-made. After all, my parents had acquired all their religious knowledge from books, and books are written by men. I saw how one law in the Bible became 18 laws in the Mishnah, and 70 in the Gemara. I read about miracles which seemed to me completely unbelievable. Everything was founded on hearsay, on what this one said and the other one wrote. I soon understood that one can seldom rely on the testimony of others. Some people suffer from hallucinations, others bear false witness. My own parents, who worshipped every Jewish book, contended that the books of other faiths were false. They themselves declared that one could not rely on old parchments and prophets if they happened to belong to another faith. Long before I read David Hume and Immanuel Kant, I came to the conclusion that one could not prove by logic the existence of God, the soul, free will, and other religious truths. One could certainly not prove by logic that this or that person had had a revelation, and that God had told him exactly how to speak and what to do. In the commentaries of Rabbi Ibn Ezra, I found traces of biblical criticism. I found arguments for and against the principles of religion in such books as The Guide for the Perplexed, the Kuzari, Faiths and Opinions, and The Duty of the Heart. Very early I had opportunity and the burning curiosity as well to read Spinoza's Ethics, Kant's Prolegomena, and David Hume's treatise on human understanding. To this day, I consider David Hume the strongest and most sincere philosopher of all. With so many statements of faith before me, my skepticism grew. It was in this state of mind that I began to read books about the Kabbalah. Young as I was, I approached this study feeling that I would not find the truth in it. On the contrary, I was convinced in advance that everything the Kabbalah said was the product of a subjective point of view, and that no God or angel had revealed himself to them. What drove me to read the philosophers and the Kabbalists was the great mystery I saw around me. I stood in the evenings on the balcony of our apartment at 10 Krochmalne Street and looked at the sky. The moon wandered over the tin roofs and chimneys. The sky was alive with stars. I had read in a popular book of astronomy that some of the stars were larger than the Earth or even the sun. Some of them were so far away that it took thousands or millions of years for their light to reach my eyes. On warm summer days, our balcony was visited by butterflies and other insects of all shapes and variations. I had read that a housefly has thousands of eyes. All these creatures have stomachs, organs of respiration, and reproduction. Each is made up of millions of molecules, and each molecule is a complicated construction of atoms. There had to be a plan behind all of this. I had read a Yiddish brochure on Darwin, but somehow his theory did not satisfy me. I was ready to admit that evolution had taken place, but behind this evolution there must have been powers with a purpose and a meaning. It is not easy to find a Kabbalistic book which clearly explains the point of view of the Kabbalah. In almost all of these books, the basic philosophy is obscured by too many references to Jewish laws and customs. Also, there are many systems in the Kabbalah itself, like the system of Rabbi Moshe of Cordova or that of Rabbi Isaac Lurie. The Kabbalah, like the Talmud, is an ocean, and if one cannot swim in it, one sinks in it. But if one searches with patience, a pattern begins to emerge. This pattern reveals a thoroughly pantheistic system. Like Spinoza, the Kabbalists believe that there is no basic difference between God and the world. The famous Baal Shem expressed it with the words, God is the world and the world is God. But still, there is a difference between the pantheism of Spinoza and that of the Kabbalah. According to Spinoza, substance has existed always. There was no creation. Spinoza's God has neither will nor purpose, neither pity nor justice. Spinoza's God has no freedom. He's actually a prisoner of his own laws. When Spinoza says God, he means nature. Spinoza's God has only two attributes which men can observe, extension and thought. And these are two sides of the same coin. Also, for Spinoza's God, might is right. From Spinoza's point of view, Genghis Khan, the Baal Shem, a tiger in the jungle, Gandhi, Hitler, and Stalin are all parts of the Godhead, necessary manifestations of the infinite substance. There can really be no talk of good and evil, of reward and punishment. According to Spinoza's philosophy, the Holocaust wrought by Hitler in Europe was as inevitable as the eruption of a volcano. In the Kabbalah, everything begins with God. Before the world was created, the Kabbalah teaches us only God existed, or as the Kabbalists call him, Ein Sof, the infinite. What God really is, no individual can fathom. His attributes begin to reveal themselves only when God had begun his creation. Why did God create? Asks Rabbi Chaim Vital in his famous book, The Tree of Life. His answer is, creation is one of God's attributes. God is, by his divine nature, a creator. Besides, how can there be a king without subjects? How can there be love without creatures to be loved? How can there be mercy without someone to receive it? Until God began to create, his attributes were merely potential, not actual. God's goodness demanded the existence of a world. But how could God create a world if God himself filled infinite space? And, as the Zohar expresses it, there was no space empty of him. Rabbi Isaac Lurie provided an answer. God had to diminish himself. He had in some part of his being to extinguish his light and thereby to create a vacuum, which is called tzimtzum, which means constriction. Naturally, such conceptions are anthropomorphic, but to give to the reader some understanding of the problem, the Kabbalah had to use human concepts. The Kabbalah describes God as a light which fills infinite space. In the middle of that light, a dark area appeared, which was a vacuum. Into this vacuum, God threw a beam of his light, which emanated from him and was part of himself. In this action, God's attributes, or sephirot, became manifest. According to the Kabbalah, God has 10 attributes which repeat themselves in all his spheres. The crown, wisdom, understanding, mercy, strength, beauty, eternity, majesty, fundamentality, and kingship. By the way, fundamentality it means actually sex. Yes, God's creation is a part of God, but diminished, attenuated to the point where God's glory could be perceived. According to the Kabbalah, God created 4 world systems: the world of emanation, of creation, of form, and of deeds. The last of these worlds is the material universe. Indeed, the cosmos with its myriads of galaxies and nebula is the lowest of God's systems. At this stage, God's light has become so dim that it turned into matter. Since the purpose of creation is that God should be able to grant mercy to those who need it, it is clear that the further away a system is from God, the more it is in need of his goodness. When a father keeps his son close to him, that son is not hungry for a good word or a gift in the way a son is who is sent to a faraway country. According to the Kabbalah, the planet Earth is more remote from God than any other world. We who are here are exiles. We live in the darkness and in the cold. God's mercy seldom reaches us. We have frequent moments of fear and doubt. Often we are not even sure whether we have a father. But just because we are so far away from the source of light, we are able to appreciate mercy when it reaches us. The Kabbalists believe that there is little free will in the higher spheres. Those near to God and his light must recognize him. They have no choice. Free choice is possible only where there is suffering and despair. The planet on which we live is called by the Kabbalists the den of devils, the abyss of Satan. Here all the dark powers hold sway. Asmodeus, Lilith, Shipta, Nama, Machlat. All this darkness and evil is necessary for man to have the power of free choice, and for all his deeds and thoughts to be in a perpetual balance between right and wrong. But just because of this condition, God can manifest more creativity and more mercy here than in other spheres. Our sphere is a stage teeming with villains who persecute a few good characters and try to destroy them. But somehow the good fights and struggles unceasingly. Life on earth is a play with innumerable acts, with infinite theses, antitheses, and syntheses. In a sense, the Kabbalah paints a Hegelian picture, or even a Marxist one. However, instead of class struggle, the Kabbalah sees an endless struggle between light and darkness. The question asked of all pantheistic systems is, where does evil come from? According to the Kabbalah, the devil has no positive substance. Evil is only a lack of goodness, just as darkness is a lack of light. When God diminished himself, dimmed his light, and created a vacuum, that very vacuum became evil. However, the absence of God's light varies. In the higher spheres, there is little darkness. Those who are near God are flooded with his radiance. But the farther away from God, the darker it becomes, the sadder, the emptier, and all of this taken together adds up to faithlessness, hate, envy, wickedness, and materialism. There is not enough of the divine light to point the way. For every truth, men must fight and pay a high price. To learn that certain mushrooms are poisonous, man has to eat the mushrooms and die from eating them. To discover that certain deeds lead to destruction, he has to commit them and be punished. Yes, the Kabbalah also believes in evolution, but this is an evolution with direction. Spinoza's God is static. He is always the same. He is an infinite machine. Nothing can be added to him, nothing can be taken away. In God, there can be no revolution. Even evolution is impossible, according to Spinoza, because everything is predetermined. In contrast, the God of the Kabbalah is creative and in a sense dependent on his creatures. He himself is free, and he delegates freedom to his creatures, because without freedom, creation is impossible. God himself doesn't build houses, write books, paint pictures, or engage in any of the other activities destined for his creatures. In a deep sense, creation is, according to the Kabbalah, a divine experiment. The giver of freedom cannot, after the granting of such freedom, be an absolute ruler. Once granted, freedom can always be used for good and for evil. The sinner disappoints God and does harm to his experiment. If man succeeds, the whole of creation is a success. One might say that man is the weakest link in God's chain, and we know that a chain is only as strong as its weakest link. If man is able to overcome Satan, then he gives meaning to the whole of creation. The Kabbalah continually emphasizes that everything a man does on earth influences the upper spheres. Angels, seraphim, and cherubim are uplifted by men's virtuous actions. On the other hand, each transgression creates sadness on high. When man does evil, he causes God to suffer, because the evil deed means that God's creation is a failure. The Midrash tells us that before God created man, he asked the advice of the angels, and they warned him that by the creation of man, he was risking his divine career. The angels contended that men might shame God's creative talent, his genius. However, God did not listen to the angels. He risked everything to create man, hoping that in the long run, men would learn the truth. Since the Kabbalah made the Godhead a dynamic power and gave it, so to speak, human qualities, it could not leave out love and sex. Spinoza compares those who love to the insane. To him, each passion is a weakness, an affect. Even pity and the sense of justice are no more than emotions which reason must overcome. In other words, according to Spinoza, you should do good deeds, but not because you have mercy, because you have pity. Just give to the poor because you should give according to your reason, not according to your feelings. But the God of the Kabbalah is emotional. According to the Kabbalah, there are godly emotions, just as there are human ones. Among God's attributes, there is mercy and beauty, which are emotional attributes. The principle of masculine and feminine exists in all spheres. Even God himself possesses a feminine aspect, which is called Shekhinah. God did not create the world by himself. He needed a divine female to give birth to creation. Different Kabbalists had different approaches to the meaning of the Shekhinah, which had been mentioned even in the Talmud. There it is said that when creation goes according to divine plan, God and Shekhinah come closer together. Conversely, sin and evil keep God and the Shekhinah apart. One might compare them to loving parents who feel renewed love for each other when their children are good. According to the Talmud and the Kabbalah, the Shekhinah tries to defend man before the throne of the Lord and to intercede for him. When the Jews sinned and the temple was destroyed, God forsook the Shekhinah, and full union could not take place again until the coming of the Messiah. Just as God has his Shekhinah, so all the heavenly hosts have their feminine counterparts. In the celestial mansions, unions and copulations take place all the time. Jacob continues to copulate with Rachel, Leah, Bilhah, and Zilpah. Some of the Kabbalistic books are full of tales about divine eroticism. Since they are all nearer to God and his light, these unions and copulations are of a higher nature than their counterparts on earth. Love on earth is never pure. Love on earth has its pitfalls. Here, love is often marred by jealousy and cruelty, treachery and falsehood. Here, copulation can be not only a virtue, but also a fatal sin. Here, souls and bodies make all kinds of mistakes and are capable of falling into the abyss of lechery and abomination. But just because love on earth is so dangerous, each successful union is a joy and a triumph to God and his divine host. Union on earth brings about union in the spheres. A great and holy love on earth brings the males and females in all the other mansions closer together. Many critics of the Kabbalah, such as Rabbi Aryeh de Medina and Rabbi Jacob Emden, accused the Kabbalists of obscenity. They decried some passages of the Kabbalah as pornography. It is true that the Kabbalah can be explained perversely, as was done by the disciples of the false Messiah, Sabbatai Tzvi, and later by the followers of Jacob Frank. The Frankists went so far as to organize Kabbalist orgies. Each law can be distorted. It is true that there are passages in the Kabbalah which look like descriptions of sexual perversions. But perversion itself is, according to the Kabbalah, a caricature of something which has a higher purpose in the divine order. Man's chief mission is correction. The Kabbalists tell us that in certain processes of creation, sacred sparks fell into the unholy host, and that the saints must save these holy sparks from the lower depths and bring them back to their sacred origin. A great deal can be said about this part of the Kabbalah. Its real sense is that here on earth, good and evil are so fused that it is difficult even for the wise to know where one ends and the other begins. Even saints have their selfishness. As long as the soul is imprisoned in the body, it shares the body's materialistic tendencies, its desires. But it is the duty of men to learn how to distinguish between the pure and the impure. In certain cases, a descent is necessary for an ascent. So God bade the prophet Hosea to marry a harlot in order that their union might serve as a symbol of God's relation to Israel. More than any idealistic philosophy, the Kabbalah understood that man could not ignore his body, its needs and desires. The Zohar and the other Kabbalistic books put much weight on the biblical statement that man was created in God's image. True, man is flesh and blood, poor in knowledge, but he is still a miniature of the Godhead. And one can learn from man what God is. And since the animals also resemble men, they too are in God's image. Both the Bible and the Talmud speak of sacred animals in heaven. Everything on earth has a divine counterpart. There are divine eyes, ears, a divine brain, divine hands and feet, divine genitals. Each passion here is modeled after a passion on high. There, as here, monogamy and polygamy exist. There, as here, exists the principle of homosexuality. We are not just a minor planet in the Milky Way, as modern astronomy tells us, but the kingdom of the earth is a portrait of the kingdom of heaven. In our microcosm is reflected the macrocosm. Although, according to the Kabbalah, evil is only the absence of good, this negative power also has its forms. Evil is not merely chaos. The powers of evil have a certain independence. If God's experiment should fail, Satan may take dominion. Darkness is not less ingenuous than light. The powers of Asmodeus and Armalus try with all their cunning to make evil permanent and to bring about God's downfall. They make an effort to bring disharmony into love, to infuse every good deed with hypocrisy, to create jealousy, hatred, quarrels, calumny, treachery, cruelty. The Kabbalah gives many epithets to the powers of evil. Insolent dogs, chaff of the grain, venom of the snake. Many scholars have already pointed out the mutual influence between the Kabbalists and the Gnostics. There are many systems in the Kabbalah and a great many variations. Hasidism is only a continuation of the Kabbalah of Rabbi Isaac Luria, or I would say Hasidism made the Kabbalah of Isaac Luria more popular, more a part of the everyday and of every man. Since the Kabbalists were Jews, and since they based the Kabbalah on the Bible, the Talmud, and the Midrash, they naturally regarded the Jews as the essence of mankind, and hence the very purpose of creation. The Jew, the Torah, and God are identical, the Zohar tells us. The Kabbalah teaches that God created the world with the letters of the Torah. With the aid of numbers and word combinations, the Kabbalists tried to make it seem as if all of their ideas were inherent in the Torah. The greatness of the Jew reflects the divine greatness, and the tragedy of the Jew is a reflection of the divine tragedy. The redemption of the Jew, the coming of the Messiah, will be a redemption for all creation. Nowhere is the love of Jewishness as great as in the Zohar, which was supposed to have been written by Rabbi Simon, the son of Yochai, but was actually compiled by Rabbi Moshe de Leon in Spain in the 13th century. The love of the Jew, as it is expressed in the Zohar, is not chauvinistic. The Jew, as seen by the Zohar, symbolizes the powers of goodness. I come now to the main theme of this lecture. What can the Kabbalah give to modern men? To the skeptic who refuses to rely on old parchments, revelations, and miracles. What does the Kabbalah offer me and others like me? My answer is that in a wonderful way, the Kabbalah contains the best of all philosophical systems, all mystical teachings, and all religions. The God of the Kabbalah is identical with the world, but he is not mechanical. In the Kabbalah, one can find the best of Plato, Aristotle, Plotinus, Spinoza, and even of such philosophers as Leibniz, Hegel, Schopenhauer, and Nietzsche. The God of the Kabbalah is spirit, but he's also matter. He's good, but he also has to make place for evil. He's dynamic and creative. He has not exhausted and will never exhaust his divine possibilities. His creatures are not mere toys fashioned for his pleasure, but active assistants in a divine project based on freedom and free initiative. In a sense, the God of the Kabbalah is tragic, as is every creator who can never be sure whether or not he will have the full cooperation of his assistants. The God of the Kabbalah is actually a man infinitely magnified, a man with human desires, human fantasies, and human complexes. There is in the Kabbalah the expression Adam Kadmon, the original man, who is actually the image of God. The Kabbalah tells us, if you want to know what God is, learn what you are. It especially dwells on the human desire to create. Through our creative powers, we grasp creation. Our human passions reflect the divine desires. Our yearning for happiness tells us what the Godhead is striving for. I do not insult the Kabbalah when I say that it also contains those verities which the pagans once knew, those living truths and joys which modern man has forgotten and which he must one day recall. This doesn't mean that the Kabbalists were eclectics. They simply thought through all religious and philosophical possibilities and made them parts of one great pattern. The Kabbalah is not a closed system. It leaves open many possibilities for religious thinkers and mystics. The Kabbalah is not incongruous with modern science. It's believed that everything is an emanation of God's light accords with Einstein's law that mass is basically energy. Its emphasis on love and sex agrees to a high degree with Freudian theory. Its assertion that the earth is the worst of all worlds is analogous to the pessimistic view of Schopenhauer. Its belief that our creative possibilities are at their greatest at the bottom of the abyss agrees in a remarkable way with artistic experience. The Kabbalah is actually an artist philosophy. I don't know of a single system which does not find its expression and illumination in the Kabbalah. Even Darwin and Malthus fit into its framework. Since the purpose of creation is to develop God's powers and bring about divine bliss, the Kabbalists were in their own fashion hedonists. For the Kabbalah, all of creation is one huge laboratory of happiness. Not only men, all the spheres and God himself desire for happiness. The Kabbalah emphasizes many times that because of our limitations, we cannot understand things higher than ourselves. All of our ideas about God and the higher spheres are no more than subjective intimations. The way to truth, says the Kabbalah, is through moral and aesthetic exaltation, through the correction of mistakes, through prayer, charity, learning, and good deeds. Love and sex are also means by which man can uplift himself. The Kabbalah, like its God, is rich in possibilities. At times I have the feeling that the Kabbalah has not yet been discovered. It is the truth of the future. It contains imaginative treasures of which we are still unaware. The picture that I have painted of the Kabbalah expresses not only what I have learned, but also what I am myself, my personality, my ideas, and my work. Such is the Kabbalah that every soul sees it in a personal light. In my sketch of the Kabbalah, I have also portrayed my own soul and given form to my own philosophy of art and being. Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you kindly. Thank you kindly. Thank you kindly. Thank you very much. Now, tell them that I will answer questions. Huh? Ladies and gentlemen, I'm ready here to answer questions if I know the answer. And the ushers go around there and you will write them and the young lady will read them to me. And if I will know the answer, I will answer them. I think I told you once that if I don't know the answer to a question, I answer another question. So there's never any trouble. Until the ushers will come, maybe someone is going to ask me a question without writing. And if I can see him or hear him, I will try to answer. Maybe someone on the first benches.
We're not doing it by writing, we're just...
Oh, not by writing. I see, oh, I made a mistake, all right. You see, I made a mistake and I have to correct my mistake. As the Kabbalah says, everything is correction. The only ones who don't believe in correction, I think, are the politicians. I've never yet heard of a president or another politician saying, I was 4 years in office and I made many mistakes. I hope that the man who is going to follow me will correct them.
We have a question.
There is already a question.
I was just going to ask what, for people who read English and perhaps for other languages, is the best edition or translation that would be available for studying the Kabbalah and the Zohar?
The gentleman wants to know that for a man who reads English, if there is enough stuff, enough books to study the Kabbalah. There are not enough books. The trouble with the Kabbalah is that the old books about the Kabbalah are so mixed up with Jewish religion and Jewish customs and magic that one really cannot get out what is essential and what is not essential. As far as modern books are concerned, I would say that Professor Shalom from Israel, from the University of Jerusalem, he is supposed to be the highest authority of the Kabbalah. He has written a number of books which have been translated into English. The trouble with Professor Shalom is, I'm afraid, that although he's a great scholar on the Kabbalah, he does not believe in the Kabbalah himself. This is what I was told. I'm not sure that it is so. But whether he believes in it or not, he knows the Kabbalah. In my case, I believe in it, but I don't know too much. No, my dear man. When I said that men must commit evil and to learn about it, this is the same as I said before, that in order to know that certain mushrooms are poisonous, men must eat them and learn that they are poisonous. This does not mean that you should go out to a store and tell them, give me a pound of poisonous mushrooms because I want to learn what they are. It means that somehow, one way or another, men fails, makes a mistake, and he is punished. But you don't have to go and sin or commit evil just to learn about evil. Which reminds me, once a young man asked me, he said, I studied books, I read the critics, and they told that creation comes from suffering. If you want to be a good writer, you have to suffer. And he said to me, I'm afraid that my trouble is that I haven't suffered enough. How should I go out and begin to suffer? So I told him, my young man, don't make any effort. Run away from suffering like from poison. It will run after you. And I told him that I once went in Warsaw to a tailor, and I asked him to make me a coat with crooked pockets. This is how I called them. So the tailor said to me, you don't have to say crooked pockets. You could have said straight pockets. In my case, they would have come out crooked anyhow. The same thing is with all these things. No one should commit evil. We should always try to do the good things. We should try to eat good mushrooms, good fruit. We should try to marry good girls. But sooner or later, one of us will make a mistake and he will get a good lesson.
Sir, I believe that your father was a Hasidic Rebbe, was he not?
Please speak a little.
I believe that your father was a Hasidic Rebbe.
He says he believes that your father was a Hasidic rabbi.
The gentleman says that he believes that my father was a Hasidic rabbi. He was a rabbi, but he was not a Hasidic rabbi, which means he was not the kind of a rabbi to whom people came to ask for miracles and so on. He was just a rabbi like any other rabbi with his synagogue, but he himself was a chassid. In other words, he went to another rabbi and came home and told miracles about him.
Oh, I see. Well, the question I like to ask...
How one rabbi can believe in another rabbi is beyond me.
Well, the question I like to ask is which practices and beliefs of, let's say, traditional Judaism would you say is not in consonance with Kabbalah? If you're a Kabbalist, wouldn't you of necessity also be a traditional Jew?
He wants to know if you believe in the Kabbalah, are there any traditions or practices of traditional Judaism that would not fit?
The gentleman wants to know if a believer in Kabbalah has to fulfill certain mitzvahs, certain deeds, which the others did not. I would say that basically the Kabbalist believes in the same Shulchan Aruch and the same code of laws as any other Jews. But the very, very pious Kabbalists had certain customs, but these did not play a big part. It was mostly a study, not really a practice. There was also the Kabbalah, the magic of the Kabbalah, but this was a different. I spoke here about the intellectual side of the Kabbalah. There was also a magic side, but the magic side was really never the essence of the Kabbalah. It was a kind of a sideline to it and not a very dignified one.
If I understand it correctly, you are not allowed to study the Kabbalah until a certain age. And then they say if you delve too much into Kabbalah, you can lose yourself and never return. Do you know anyone who has?
Yes. I will tell you, it is true, it was told, it is written in the books that one should never study the Kabbalah before one is 30, before one has studied a lot of the Talmud and so on. And if a young man really studies the Kabbalah, he may lose himself. I am the one who studied the Kabbalah when I was about 15 and 16, and I lost myself. I cannot find myself until today. And this is the reason I keep on writing and scribbling, hoping maybe this way I will find myself. But let me tell you that there are many people who did not study the Kabbalah and they also lost themselves. So there's no way out. It seems we are a lost generation one way or another. Yes, there is another question coming.
Mr. Singer, the little I understood of Moses Chaim Luzato's The Path of the Upright suggested to me that what he had to say was the very opposite of hedonism and was a direction towards sexual purity, which seems to be the opposite of what you had to say about the Kabbalists.
I cannot understand why in one case the loudspeaker works well, in the other case badly. You will have to tell me what the gentleman. You translate your...
He's talking about Luzato's The Path of the Upright, which he said seems to be just the opposite of hedonism and in fact seems to talk about sexual purity.
The gentleman says that Luzzatto, who was a great Kabbalist, and others spoke about sexual purity. They all spoke about sexual purity. No Kabbalist told his disciples to have orgies or to do the things which are written in the books of modern literature. But for them, sexual purity was not avoiding sex. Sexual purity meant for them that people should copulate only when they really love one another, and then naturally they had to be married and so on and so on. In other words, they had to do these things while enjoying them, just the same feeling that they are serving God. In other words, sexual purity does not mean, according to the Kabbalah, to live in celibacy.
No, I don't mean celibacy. I meant sexual faithfulness as opposed to hedonism. Sexual faithfulness towards somebody you love, as opposed to...
Is this the same man?
Yes. He says what he was talking about was not purity, but sexual faithfulness towards someone you love.
The gentleman said that he did not speak about sexual purity, but about faithfulness. Well, the Kabbalist believes in being faithful, but naturally you had only to believe to be faithful to your wife as long as she lived, or as long as you were married to her. If you divorced her, you had not to be faithful. You could easily take another woman and be faithful to her as long as she lived. But I don't know why actually I don't understand your question. But as I told you, I'm afraid that this is the case where I answer another question, because I did not understand the first one. So we will go over to people who will ask us more simpler, more clearer questions. There's a gentleman who lifted the hand. Well, it's the microphone will come to you. Maybe if not today, so another day.
to go ahead?
The gentleman wants to know if there is a destruction of the world. The Christians believe that before Jesus will come again, a great part of the world will be destroyed. The Kabbalists did not believe in it. It is true that in the Zohar tells us, and even the Midrash and the Talmud, that before God has created this world, he destroyed many worlds before. But according to Jewish belief, this was not done willingly, that God destroyed them. He destroyed his worlds like a writer who wants to write a book, and if the book is not successful, he will burn the manuscript and try to write again until he is satisfied. In other words, destruction is not one of God's free deeds. He's not satisfied or happy by destruction. But if he does not succeed, if his experiment is not good, he will destroy one world and make another one. It depends on us. If we are going to make a good world, he's not going to destroy this one. If he will destroy it, it will mean that we failed. We did not cooperate in his experiment.
Mr. Singer, you mentioned that one of the prime attractions to you of the Kabbalah is the fact that man is in effect a participator in the ongoing process of creation. But doesn't traditional Kabbalah say that man only becomes such a participant through the performance of the mitzvot, the various commandments given to God by man?
What are the last words? What are the last?
We couldn't quite. Could you move the microphone a little farther from your mouth at the end of
Keep the microphone away from your mouth and make the question short, then I will understand it. I heard you say that according to my lecture, man participates in creation. But what is the question?
The question is, doesn't traditional Kabbalah say that man only becomes such a participant through the performance of the mitzvot, the various commandments given to God by man?
What he wants to know is, in the way in which one participates in creation, doesn't the traditional Kabbalah say that you have to perform the various mitzvot in order to...
The gentleman wants to know that if our participating in creation is not connected with keeping all the laws, the halacha. Yes, it is so. The Kabbalists taught so, that by keeping God's laws, you are really cooperate with God. In other words, the fact that you write a novel or you paint a picture does not mean that you are helping God as much as when you behave decently, you are a good man, and you keep also the halacha, the Sabbath, and so on and so on. This is what the Kabbalists said. Naturally, the Kabbalists had to be very careful to agree with everything which is written in the Talmud. If not, they would have been excommunicated. But I feel that basically the Kabbalists were not as hot about the halacha, about the mitzvot, about the good deeds which are written about the dogmas as were other Jews. They felt that every form of creation, as long as it is done with deep thinking and with great will, is important. In other words, they were not basically as pious as they had to be because they lived among the pious, among the people who kept the dogma.
Do you think that the Kabbalistic notion of creation, or tzimtzum, is more in accord with the Big Bang theory of creation?
He wants to know if the theory of creation in the Kabbalah is similar to the scientific theory which is called the Big Bang theory.
Well, the Big Bang theory, let me tell you, is the silliest theory I have ever read about, although all the scientists somehow, every few weeks I read in the New York Times that finally it was discovered how the universe was created. And I read a few lines and it always ends up with this Big Bang. Somehow they can never get rid of it. They believe that the world is a bomb, the universe is a bomb which has exploded some 10 billion years ago. It keeps on exploding, the universe is expanding. And when this bomb will stop exploding, everything will fall back and nothing will remain except maybe some memory, I don't know where. I can tell you, although I'm not much a very strict believer, I think that the idea that God has created the world is a better theory than the Big Bang. It makes more sense to me. And since I cannot prove my theory, they cannot prove that there was a Big Bang. I think my theory is as good as theirs and vice versa.
You know Immanuel Velikovsky?
The gentleman wants to know if I know Immanuel Velikovsky. Yes, this is the man who believed that the Earth and Venus had an encounter some 4,000 years ago, and many things happened because of this. All I can say is, I wasn't there, and I don't know. If they had an encounter, maybe, I don't know how Mr. Velikovsky knows it, but he seems to know many things I don't know. The lady wants to know if Lilith is mentioned in the Kabbalah. Yes, absolutely. Lilith is supposed to be the wife of Satan or one of his wives. I want you to know that Satan is a convinced polygamist. And I have many times written about it that Lilith is a very jealous lady, although she herself behaves not better than he. Yes, Lilith is mentioned in the Kabbalah. She plays especially a big part in the Kabbalistic magic.
But that's different from the creation myths of Adam and Lilith.
Yes, it is written that Adam's first wife before he married Eve, Lilith was his wife, and he had with her a number of devils. But it seems that Lilith, there are many kinds of Lilith. Lilith herself is more of an institution than a single female. As some poet said, there is a Lilith in every woman.
Wasn't there an aspect of Kabbalism which involved numbers being equated with letters and like secret messages in various passages that people had to decipher?
She wants to know about gematria.
The lady wants to know about gematria. The Kabbalah always had to do with each letter of the alphabet had a number, and the Kabbalah combined these numbers and made people believe that according to these numbers, many things happen. It is true, the Kabbalah believed in what they call gematria and notraken, initials, and all kinds of these things. But I would say they had to express these ideas in numbers and in initials to show that there is some basis to their words in the Bible. Because there was always the fear, the Kabbalists were always afraid that people will say, how do you know that it is so? And they had to prove one way or another that it's already hinted in the Bible. This is the reason but actually their ideas have nothing to do with these numbers. The Kabbalah is a philosophy, a religious philosophy. I think we can finish it.
Thank you.
We'll have one more question.
The lady said 2 more questions.
When you use Kabbalistic idea in your stories, for example, I remember one of your stories where a man wishes that somebody's house burned down, and the house does burn down, seemingly the idea being that mind can control matter. Now, when you use such an idea in your story, do you actually believe in that idea?
The gentleman wants to know that if I write about a cult or I use Kabbalistic terms, if I really believe in them. I will tell you, I use these terms actually as literary symbols, but just the same, I believe in them. I am one of these silly people who believe that there are other beings in this world, even on this earth, of which we have no inkling, stronger and weaker than men. I believe that there are devils and imps, I don't know what they are. I once said that when a man came home 3,000 years ago from the field and took off his woolen garment, he most probably saw sparks, just as we see sparks when we take off our sweater. If these people would have asked themselves, what is the reason? Why do I see sparks in the dark? Maybe electricity, or at least static electricity, would have been discovered thousands of years sooner. But people were afraid to ask. I say that we also see sparks of which we are ashamed or afraid to ask. And these sparks, to my mind, are connected with telepathy, clairvoyance, premonitions, and all these things. I don't know more about these things than you do, but I just happen to believe in them because I feel that we don't know already everything. That 500 years from now, the children which will go to the public school will learn things that if we would have known them today, or somebody would have told us about them, we would be most astonished. We would see that they are impossible. So why shouldn't there be also spirits and demons?
Excuse me.
How to distinguish God's law when the choice isn't obvious between a couple of actions?
The gentleman asked me a good question. Could I tell a skeptic how to know which is a good deed and which is a bad deed? I will tell you, since I'm a skeptic myself, I say to myself, each deed which creates pleasure or more pleasure than pain is to me a good deed. A deed which causes a lot of pain and little pleasure is a bad deed. I try in my own life to create as much pleasure for other people as I try. Naturally, if my wife would hear this, she would say that it isn't so. But have you ever seen a man who's always pleasant to his wife 24 hours a day? But even with her, I try my best. Ladies and gentlemen, it was a great pleasure talking to you.
Thanks for listening. For more information on the 92nd Street Y, New York, and all of our programs, please visit us at 92ny.org.